I wonder what you imagine the Apostle Paul to be like. We're inclined to think about Paul as kind of Christian Superman. The guy who had no fear, the guy who always knew what to say and when to say it, the guy whose sermons would just blow us out of the water. Effectively, we kind of imagine the Apostle Paul as the guy that all Christians should aspire to be. Yet if that's your view of Paul, you might be a little bit surprised by what he says in chapter 2, verses 1 to 5. Remember, Paul's just said at the end of chapter 1 that God delights in using the weak and the foolish people to fulfill his purposes so that we would know that he is the one who is due all of the glory. And now in chapter 2, when Paul starts expanding upon how God uses the weak and the foolish things to accomplish his purposes, he wants you to know that he himself is no exception to that rule. Look with me from verses 1 to 5 of 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul says, "And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling, and my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." Paul's message to the Corinthians here runs totally against the grain of Corinthian culture. The Corinthians were used to secular orators coming to Corinth and boasting of their great accomplishments and flaunting their eloquence as a means of drumming up an audience. Yet Paul's message was quite the opposite, wasn't it? Look what he says in verse 1. It says he didn't come with lofty speech or wisdom. He came in weakness, fear and trembling, verse 3. Verse 4, he didn't come with plausible words of wisdom. This is the great Apostle Paul we're talking about here, Christianity's big gun. So you might be wondering to yourself, if all that the Apostle Paul says about his own speech is true, then how come Paul's words have been so influential? How come throughout history millions of people's lives have been transformed through the writing and words of the Apostle Paul? Well, because Paul is sharing the gospel message. The message itself, Paul says, is the source of power. The way Paul says in verse 5, it's almost better that I'm not impressive in and of myself, because it shows you and it shows the Corinthians that the transforming power doesn't lie, Paul says, in my ability to impress you or entertain you, but the work of transformation and the power of transformation is found by the Spirit's work of the gospel itself. Here's your challenge for today. Firstly, do you ever shy away from speaking of Jesus because you doubt whether or not your method or delivery would be good or eloquent enough? Well, if you don't think your delivery would be good enough and that stops you from sharing the gospel, you're in good company. Because the Apostle Paul, that's the exact way he felt. And so he would want to remind you that the power of your message doesn't lie in your delivery, it lies in the message itself. Take heart, the gospel itself is power. The word power in the Greek is dunamis. It's where we get our word dynamite. It's literally dynamite power. But secondly, how do Paul's words influence or affect the sort of preachers that you listen to today? With a world of resources right at our fingertips, we can easily be sucked into listening just to the most eloquent or entertaining of speakers. Let them guide our thinking. But if that was the case, we would be falling into the exact same trap as the Corinthians. Fill your mind with preaching that edifies your soul through faithfulness to the gospel and the word of God. Hope you have a great day.